Hi, I'm Emily, and today I'm going to be interviewing Mr. Jason Harris. He writes about oncology, and I'm going to be interviewing him about that and his job. For your job, what kind of education did you have to get?
Okay. So I graduated with a BA in English, and I went to work in PR for about a year. And after that, I worked at a weekly newspaper. I worked at a couple of daily newspapers, and I worked at the Burlington County Times. And as a bit of career advice, don't make jokes about your boss being a flamenco dancer because that can get you fired. and so I went from there. So one of the editors there knew somebody who knew somebody and got me on with a company called Slack Incorporated, and that's when I started writing about oncology. So that was about 2008. So I did that for about 4 years, and then the guy who hired me there, he left and he went into advertising, pharma advertising, and so I did that for about a year or two, and that was awful. Don't ever do that. I can't recommend anybody go into pharma advertising. So I started at this job at MJH Life Sciences 3, 4 years ago, something in there.
Okay, so why did you decide to become a writer?
Um, I can't do math, which is a joke, but it's kind of true. So, I knew I was going to do something with reading and writing because those are the things I'm best at, and so I knew I was going to do something in writing on some level. And I'd always grown up wanting to be a newspaper columnist, and newspaper jobs largely went away when I was in my mid to late 20s. So that sort of went out the window. And like I said, I kind of fell into working in oncology. But the good or bad thing about that is that medicine is always something that people need to know more about. It's not a job that can really be outsourced. It's something that's always going to need to be there. It's not something that you can do with an algorithm. So on that level, it's been pretty successful for me.
And would you say that you like your current job, or like, is there a past job that you liked better?
So I really love being a newspaper reporter. I covered public safety, so that was police, it was fire, it was emergency services, and that's a really exciting job. It can also be a heartbreaking job because obviously I was writing about crime, and it's often the worst time in somebody's life is when they get a reporter calling because something horrible has happened to them or a loved one, and it takes a particular skill and I guess a particular sensibility to be able to do that. But I really enjoyed it. It was it was new every day. It was exciting every day. It's been years since a cop lied to me, and I don't know what to do with myself anymore. I don't know who I am. So that was the job I liked most. The problem is, like I said, newspaper jobs have largely gone away, and the ones that are still there don't pay great. So I like what I do now.
Is there something specific that you would say is like the best part of your job?
Um, so I do a couple of different things. One is I write for our publication Oncology Live, and that's directly to clinicians and academic researchers. The other thing I do, I'm the managing editor for a publication called Oncology Fellows, and so those are more students, people who are doctors. They finish medical school, but they're still in their training. So there's two parts of that. Is one, I get people who are young and just kind of starting out in their careers, and so it's exciting to give them a chance to get some of their first publications. And the other part of that is because I guess the boss, is I get to pick and choose who I want to speak. So obviously I'm Black, and so that gives me the opportunity to elevate some voices that don't get heard a lot in, especially in medicine. It's a very white male profession, so I get the opportunity to elevate women, people of color. I think the last issue I just had was all written by people of color of one type or another. So I feel like this minimal amount of power I have, it's incumbent on me to elevate some voices that otherwise may not be heard.
Yeah, so since you get to choose like who writes certain articles, like is there a specific like algorithm you have for choosing who gets to write what?
No, it's generally, I wouldn't call it an algorithm. It's kind of what is interesting. What so fellows specifically because it's written by fellows. It's what they find interesting. So a lot of it is what is new and exciting in the world of oncology and the various diseases. Um, and there's some issues that are very pressing among that population. So obviously, you go to medical school. Most people graduate with a lot of medical debt. So finances are an issue. Burnout is a real big concern. These are people working incredible hours. Some of them have families, have children, so that's an extra stressor. Um, and oncology, especially, sometimes you're dealing with patients who are dying, and it can be a long, slow, painful death, no matter what you do. So that's always an issue, dealing with people at end of life issues. So there are some things that specifically we like to focus on, but in a lot of cases, it's what is interesting to the fellows. What are they talking about right now?
You were talking about how it's like sometimes it's kind of hard because it's kind of a serious topic and sometimes it can be upsetting. So do you think that it makes your job sometimes harder if you're writing about something like that?
Not for me because I don't really write for patients. So um, when I talk about end of life stuff, it's more how is the physician going to handle having the conversation with the family, have the conversation with the patient. I'm not um, I'm not talking to patients, let's say. That is something I used to do, obviously, when I was in newspapers, um, but it's not so much an issue anymore.
Okay, so since like you obviously work in cancer research, so does that mean that like because of certain awareness months or anything, does your work schedule change around the year or does what you write change?
Not for me. We have a number of publications in the company, and some of them pay more attention to that kind of thing, but it doesn't come up very often in my job because, since, like I said, I'm writing for physicians, and they don't really care about that kind of stuff for the most part, so it doesn't come up very often.
Okay, so then what would you say an average day at your job looks like for you?
An average day at my job. Um, so recently, I just finished what is my major project for the year. It's called our Giants of Oncology. So a lot of the past couple of months. Boy, I'm glad to be done with that. For the past couple of months, it's been a lot of wrangling writers and doctors. So this project, we named 15 Giants of Cancer Care, and these are people chosen by their peers, and they've contributed on some significant level to oncology or oncology care. So um, 15 winners means 15 writers, 14 not including myself. Excuse me. And so I have to make the assignments, then I have to follow up with the writers. I have to do when they make their submissions. I edit the piece, and sometimes it goes back to the writer because I have more questions. Uh, some of it is me getting information from the doctors themselves, like photos or their resumes. I need to get in. Once the story's done, I have to send it back to the doctor because they need to fact check just to make sure everything is what it's supposed to be. Um, what else goes into that? I have to get pictures from them, and then because this year is unusual, normally we would have a live award ceremony in the summer at a major oncology conference. Obviously, we couldn't do that this year, so instead we did a virtual award ceremony. So that meant I had to interview all the doctors and interview people to talk about the doctors. So it wound up being for 15 winners, I wound up doing about 43 interviews when it was all said and done. And these are all video interviews. So some of them are good with the video, some of them aren't. Some of them really understood what we were trying to do, some of them didn't. So when I got that back, then we had to edit all that. So, if we have 10 minutes of video and we've got 45 seconds that we need to show, so that has to get edited down. And a lot went into that project. And it was the first time I'd ever done it. So everybody was kind of flying blind. So I've seen a rough draft and it looks pretty good. We'll see what it looks like when we finally get the final. But That's a very long way of saying I do a lot of writing and interviewing in a given day and editing in a given day.
So obviously you mentioned that since the pandemic and everything, you had to do all video interviews. So what is different about your job like this year versus like a normal year?
Yeah, so I'm more comfortable on your side of the camera where nobody can see me. So that's been unusual. And I do a lot of phone interviews anyway, so in that sense, it's not that different. But yeah, normally there's travel that goes into my job a couple of times a year. That is obviously out, and it was a lot of filling in for other people because you couldn't get out and travel. So a lot of people, myself included, wound up picking up a lot of jobs that otherwise would have gone elsewhere just because there was nobody out there to do them. We couldn't hire freelancers to travel to San Francisco to cover a conference. So we wound up doing that in-house and doing video interviews, and everything has gone virtual, which is much different than obviously it was in years past.
So since you're working from home, you said that in your letter. Have you had like more work or less work to do?
More, but mostly because of that video project, which is the first time we've had to do that. But yeah, I don't know that it was more or less than a given year outside of that.
So you mentioned that sometimes you would get to travel for your interviews that you would do.
Mm-hmm.
So what was that like for you?
Yeah, so obviously there are oncology conferences, and they're all over the world. I've never traveled overseas for a conference, but it's different in that it's a lot more face-to-face interviews, and most of my job does not have daily deadlines. Whereas when I'm at a conference, we have email newsletters, so I have to produce 2 stories a day for 3 days because we send out. So most conferences will be over a weekend, so it'll be like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So each day we're at the conference, I'm writing 2 stories for that day that will go out the day after as part of an email. So, which is a bit more analogous to what I did when I was at a daily newspaper, but that's unusual in that it's not what I do most of my time anymore.
Okay, so like if you're writing something, like what would you say your process is for like planning and then actually writing?
I wish I could tell you I had a better process. So for like a daily story or a smaller, say like 1,000 to 2,000 word story, I can generally sit down and just write it. For something larger than that, so these Giants of Cancer Care pieces, those are about 2,000 to 2,500 words. So when I'm doing my interview, I want to have a sense of the things I need to learn from the doctor. So that talks about their background, their upbringing, how they got into medicine, sort of their path once they got into medicine, and some of what they've done in their career that's outstanding. So writing really starts with reading and researching. So before I go in to talk to that person, I need to know a little bit about who they are and where they've come from. Otherwise, I can't ask good questions, right? So like you sent me interview questions ahead of time to get a sense of who I was. Otherwise, you can't really do an interview. It's very difficult to do an interview with somebody you have no idea who or what they're about, right? So when I come into those interviews, I already have questions written, and then that's more of an outline for me because I don't want to stick too closely to those. It should sound like a conversation. So if the doctor wants to take me in a direction that I'm not familiar with or I think is interesting, I will go there and maybe drop some of my prepared questions, just because the goal is to get the most interesting interview out there. So once I've done the interview, I generally have an idea of what I want to get on the page. Some writers are more responsible, and they'll do an outline and sort of do more planning. And I've never done that, so don't follow my process. But yeah, when I start writing, I have an idea. You have to sit down and have an idea of what you want to say before you can start putting words on the page. And then honestly, sometimes it is surprising. Sometimes stories don't go where I expect them to go. I'll start writing, oh, this fits better with this other thing that I wasn't going to use, or this fits better later in the story with this anecdote than I was going to put it in the first couple of paragraphs, but it doesn't work there. So it's an ongoing process until it's finally published, and then I have to stop messing with it.
So I don't know how much of an issue this is for you, but if you do get writer's block, how do you help that?
I'm not allowed. So the thing about publications like this is, there's always that beast has to be fed. You always have to have something has to go on the page. Especially, I learned this lesson in newspapers. Whether you have anything to say or not, that the paper has to come out. So you have to come up with something. So um, sometimes it's just, you write a bunch of stuff that doesn't work until you find something that does, and you build off of that. Sometimes it's if you can take a few minutes to get up and walk away and maybe do some thinking, maybe do an outline. Sometimes I will write the end of a story before I write the beginning, or I won't necessarily know how I'm going to get into a story. So I'll say, well, I know these things are going to go in there, right? So I'll start in the middle. I have certain data that has to be presented in this story. All right, we'll put the data on the page and, at least start from there. If I know it's going to take 2 hours to write a story, it doesn't matter how those 2 hours shake out. So maybe I'll do the middle first and then the end, and come back and do the beginning at the end of that.
So when you are actually writing, are you assigned ideas, or do you have to come up with your own thing to write?
A bit of both. So just yesterday, my editor gave me some stuff that she needs for some upcoming issues. So I'll just sit down and write those. With Onc Fellows, I have a little bit more autonomy to pick and choose what I want to do. And if I go to my boss and say, hey, this thing is interesting, we should write about it, and she agrees, then I have so long as we're all on the same page, it's no problem if I suggest stories to her.
And then how do you start researching for an article that you're going to write?
Google. Yeah, that's 20 years ago, it probably would have been, go to the card catalog at the library, but that's not really how we do research anymore, right? So yeah, so if I have some sort of sense of the issues I'm writing about, just because I've been doing this for a while. So I have an idea of where to go. And, with oncology, there are certain publications like the New England Journal of Medicine or what am I trying to say? The Journal of the National Cancer Institute. Those are publications I know I can go to if I'm really stuck and say, okay, well, I want to write about something about breast cancer today. All right, well, what's the latest research in breast cancer? So I can start there. Or I'm writing about this doctor, what has he or she done in their career, right? So they'll have a faculty page. Faculty page will list their education, list their title, will list what they're currently researching. Sometimes it'll list major awards, and so I'll build it off from there. Sometimes if they've been written about in an article, that's always helpful, because they'll talk about their mentors or their process or how they came to some discovery or determination. So yeah, so it starts broad and gets more.
And then when we were exchanging like emails in the letter you sent me, you attached 2 articles you wrote. And so what would you say was the difference for writing them? Because I know one of them was on Henry Lynch, and I'm pretty sure that was the one he had previously passed. And then David Johnson, I'm pretty sure, was still living.
Right. Yeah, so that's that's a pretty big difference, right? But so let's take the Lynch story. Obviously, he can't speak for himself, so I have to go to the people who knew him, and they just lost a friend, a mentor, a colleague. So Sometimes you get people in that situation, they really want to talk. You know, sometimes you get people who are just a little too bruised at the moment to want to say anything. And so, you know, you just kind of be gentle, you know, tell them, like in this particular case, one of his assistants had worked with him for 20 years. And when I first contacted her, she was not in a position or in a place where she felt comfortable talking about working with him for so long. And so I said, okay, I understand. I know, you know, it's emotional. If you want to talk, get back to me. And so a couple of weeks later, she reached out and said, hey, you know, if you've got some time, I would like to do that interview. So with David Johnson, obviously it's a little easier because he can speak from himself. But you know, so when I made the assignments for those stories, I took Lynch on purpose. I could have given it to another writer, but I wanted the challenge of doing a story where the story subject could not speak on his own. And I don't know. I mean, you read it. I thought the story came out pretty good for being a pretty unusual situation. They usually aren't all that difficult, but or they're not as difficult as that, I should say. That was a unique circumstance.
I think that the experience of writing an article on someone who could not speak for themselves, do you think that like improved your writing and like helped it, or do you think that it was kind of frustrating?
Hmm. It's definitely a different story when the story subject can't speak. So it made me work harder. Uh, so I don't know if the writing itself was better or worse. I think the project was um, more satisfying because it was more difficult to do. Um, you know, the story I did with Dr. Johnson, the funny thing about that is the first time I did it, and he, you know, we had a really good conversation, and as it turns out, my recorder wasn't working. So when I sat down to write, I only had my audio asking him questions and none of the answers. So we had to go back and fortunately for me, he was very gracious with his time, and he was willing to sit down for another 45 minutes to an hour to do another interview. So if I have advice, it's make sure all your devices are working. um, but so yeah, so I don't, yeah, as far as whether the writing was better, I don't know. It was a more satisfying experience going through that challenge.
So I'm gonna get kind of off topic here. But if someone wanted to become a writer, is there like any like specific advice that you would give to them?
Beyond don't. Um, read. Read everything. Read stuff you like, read stuff you don't like, read stuff you agree with, stuff you disagree with. Um, you know, all of those tools, all of your reading is going to appear in your writing. You know, you'll read good writing. Say, okay, I see what you eventually begin to understand what is good writing and what is bad writing. And you'll want to um, emulate good writing in your own work. And you'll understand what is bad writing and why it's bad. And you'll learn to avoid those pitfalls in your own writing. You know, and you have to write. It's a muscle you have to flex. Um, you know, it's not something you can leave and go away from and come back to 6 weeks later and still be good at it. You have to sit down and do the work. And you know, I know people who really enjoy writing and the whole process of it, and uh, I don't. I don't enjoy the process of writing. I find it painful. But you know, I tell myself that pain means it's working. If it's too easy, then I'm not pushing myself, right? So, um, so yeah. So those would be the the advice I would give. And I'll also add, you know, be honest. You know, truth overall, and you know that played out especially when I was doing news stories. But you know, your readers will know when you're not being honest, when you're holding back, and it's not as much an issue in the writing I do now, but certainly with that kind of writing, and certainly if you're writing fiction, people are going to know when you're trying to get off on the cheap, or you haven't done your research, or you haven't really um, put yourself into your work. So, you know, there's the old line: "Writing is easy. You just sit down at a typewriter and open up a vein," and it's a computer keyboard anymore, but that's still true.
So are there any like personal experiences that you would think that are like important for other people to know so that they can learn from?
Well, I said the thing about don't call your boss a flamenco dancer. Hit your deadlines. As someone who is now working as much as an editor as a writer, there's nothing more nerve wracking than people who don't make deadline, or at the very least say why, say if you're not going to make your deadline before the deadline. So if something is due at 5, don't tell me at 4:45 that it's not coming. Let me let me know early on. But experiences, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you can't write from a hovel. You have to get out of your room and you have to get out and experience life. And this sounds very arty farty right now, but you do, whatever you're writing from your experience. So if you don't have experience, how are you going to write, right? So all of the stuff I've done before informs the writing I do now. Even if you can't see it on the page, I can see it on the page. And you can probably feel it on the page, even if you can't see it. So yeah, get out and live and make mistakes and skin your knees and that sort of thing. God, that's gross.
Okay, so I think that just about wraps up all like the questions that I had. So thank you for doing the interview. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.